There is something about windows at night that unsettles the human mind. When the world outside turns dark, a pane of glass becomes more than just a view to the outside. It becomes a mirror, a fragile barrier, a silent stage where anything or anyone could be standing on the other side. This story isn't about superstition. It isn't about ghosts, shadows, or folklore. It's about something far more real, far more invasive, and far more terrifying. It's about a stalker. And it begins with a young woman in her 20s, living alone in a modest apartment, just a few floors above ground level. Her name was never shared in the police reports that followed. Neighbors only referred to her as the girl in 3B. She was private, quiet, and seemingly ordinary. She worked long hours at a marketing firm, often coming home after sunset. Most nights she curled up with her laptop, a blanket, and a small lamp casting soft light across her living room. To anyone outside, peering in from the dark, it painted a clear picture of her life, a picture she never realized she was sharing. For weeks, nothing seemed unusual. Life was routine, predictable, but it always begins subtly, almost too subtle to notice. The first sign came one night when she thought she saw something move in her window's reflection. A faint shift in the darkness, just beyond the glass. At first, she brushed it off as her imagination. After all, the human brain is wired to detect movement, even where none exists. She convinced herself it was nothing. But nothing became harder to ignore. 2 nights later, as she scrolled through her phone on the couch, she felt a sudden tightening in her chest, an instinct, an awareness that she was being watched. Her eyes flicked toward the window. Beyond the thin curtains, she thought she saw it again, the faint outline of a head. Just for a second. Still, waiting, watching. She froze. Her heart pounded against her ribs. Her mind raced with explanations. Maybe a shadow, maybe a trick of the light, maybe a neighbor passing by. She forced herself to stand, slowly walked toward the window, and pulled the curtains shut. But from that night onward, she couldn't shake the feeling. Over the next week, odd details began to pile up. She'd come home from work and notice faint smudges on the outside of her window. Smudges shaped like fingertips. She tried to dismiss it as dirt, or maybe rain. But when it didn't rain, and when she cleaned the glass only to find the smudges return days later, her dismissal became harder to believe. One evening, she returned home later than usual. The air was colder, the streets quieter. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, slid the key into her lock, and paused. Something was off. Her door wasn't fully closed. It was latched, but slightly ajar. She froze in place, listening. Silence. No movement. Carefully, she pushed the door open. The apartment looked untouched. Everything was where she had left it. She convinced herself she must not have closed it properly that morning. She wanted to believe that. She needed to believe that. But deep down, she knew better. That night, she went to bed earlier than usual. Sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the building, every distant car outside, sent shivers through her. And then, sometime after midnight, she woke up with a start. Something had pulled her out of sleep. She didn't know what. She listened. The apartment was still. She rolled over, facing the window, and that's when she saw it. A figure, tall, motionless, pressed against the glass. Her blood turned cold. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. The figure wasn't a blur this time. It wasn't her imagination. It was real. Someone was standing outside her window, watching her as she slept. She scrambled up, heart hammering, and in a panic she yanked the curtains shut. Her hands shook violently. She grabbed her phone, ready to call the police, but when she mustered the courage to peek outside again, the figure was gone. The street was empty, silent. She called the police anyway. 2 officers arrived within 20 minutes. They checked the street, the yard, the fire escape. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of forced entry, no witnesses. One officer reassured her it was probably a homeless person passing by, maybe curious, maybe harmless. They promised to patrol the area more often. She nodded, but deep down, she knew this wasn't random. This was deliberate. The following days blurred together. She tried to go about life as normal, but every night, the fear crept back. She'd sit on her couch, trying to distract herself with the television, but her eyes would wander to the window again and again. And sometimes, she'd swear she could see movement in the glass, just out of focus, just far enough away to question her own sanity. Her friends noticed the change in her. At lunch breaks, she was quieter, distracted. She told one of them about the figure at the window. Her friend suggested moving, or at least getting security cameras. She laughed it off, pretending she wasn't as scared as she was. But inside, her fear was consuming her. And then came the night she couldn't pretend anymore. It was raining, heavy enough to drown out the noise of the city. The rhythmic tapping on the glass made her uneasy. She sat with a blanket, scrolling through her phone, when her screen lit up with a notification. It was a text message from an unknown number. It read, "Nice blue blanket. Looks cozy." The blanket was wrapped around her shoulders at that very moment. Her stomach dropped. Her hands went numb. Her eyes darted toward the window. The curtains were closed. But she knew. He was out there, watching. Her hands trembled as she held her phone. The text glowed on the screen like a cruel confirmation of her worst fear. Whoever this was, they weren't just outside anymore. They had her number. They were closer than she had ever imagined. She tried to steady her breathing, tried to think logically, but logic was slipping. She immediately called the police again, voice shaking as she explained what had happened. The dispatcher's tone was calm, professional, almost detached. She promised to send a unit. Minutes felt like hours. She kept pacing the living room, every creak of the floorboard magnified, every shadow in the corners suspicious. When the officers arrived, they checked her phone, documented the number, and assured her they would trace it. They once again inspected the building and the surrounding area, but there was no sign of anyone. One officer, older and more experienced, gave her a long look before leaving. He told her plainly, "You should stay with someone for a while, just until we figure this out." But she had no family nearby. Most of her friends lived across the city, far from her apartment. She insisted she would be fine. She told herself she couldn't let fear control her life. But fear had already moved in. The text didn't stop. The next night, "You should close your curtains tighter." The night after that, red wine again. "You really do love routine." Each message was a violation, proof that he was there, watching through the glass. She kept her phone by her side constantly, waiting, dreading the next notification. Sleep became impossible. She started leaving the lights on in every room, hoping the brightness would make her feel safer. But it only made her more visible, her silhouette outlined for him to enjoy. Days turned into a blur of paranoia. At work, she would jump every time her phone buzzed. Walking home, she constantly checked over her shoulder, certain someone was following. At night, she locked every door, bolted every window, but it didn't matter. The texts kept coming. One evening, exhausted and desperate, she decided to test him. She turned off all the lights in her apartment, leaving only the glow of her laptop screen. Then, with trembling hands, she typed a message back to the unknown number. "Who are you? What do you want?" The reply came instantly. "I want to know why you never waved back." Her chest tightened. The implication was clear. He wasn't just watching from a distance. He was close enough to expect a response. She slammed the laptop shut, her breath shallow and uneven. For hours, she sat frozen in silence, too afraid to move, too afraid to check the window. The police were becoming less sympathetic. They told her to change her number, install security cameras, and consider moving. But deep down, she knew it wouldn't matter. Stalkers don't just disappear. They escalate. And he did. Late one night, while rain lashed against the building, she woke to a soft sound. Not a creak, not the hum of the fridge. This was different. A deliberate sound. A tap. She turned her head toward the window. The curtains were closed, but the shape of a hand pressed against the fabric was unmistakable. Long fingers splayed, motionless. Her body went rigid. She couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe. She fumbled for her phone, her shaking hands dialing 911. As she whispered into the phone, the hand slowly dragged downward across the curtain, leaving a faint trail in the fabric. When the police arrived, the hand was gone. The rain had washed away any footprints outside. Once again, there was no evidence, no proof. But she knew what she had seen. Sleep was no longer possible. She started keeping a kitchen knife by her bed. Every sound became a threat, every shadow an intruder. She moved through her days like a ghost herself, drained, paranoid, on edge. Then came the night that shattered what little sense of safety she had left. She returned home late, clutching groceries, her body heavy with exhaustion. As she unlocked her door, she noticed something that made her heart stop. Her doormat was gone. Not stolen, not blown away. Gone. Replaced with a different one. A match she had never seen before. It was a message. A quiet reminder that he had been there. That he could come inside whenever he pleased. Her hands shook so violently she dropped her keys. She called the police again, desperate, her voice cracking as she begged them to understand the danger. But without proof, without a break-in, without physical harm, they couldn't do much. They filed another report, promised more patrols, and left her alone in the suffocating silence of her apartment. That night, she didn't even bother pretending she could sleep. She sat in the corner of her bedroom, knife clutched in her hands, her eyes locked on the curtains covering her window. Hours passed. Midnight came and went. The city outside was silent. And then, at 3:12 a.m., her phone lit up with a final message. "You look so beautiful when you're afraid," she screamed, throwing her phone across the room. She ripped the curtains open, knife raised, and there he was, standing just beyond the glass, smiling. Her scream tore through the room, raw and primal, but the figure outside didn't flinch. He didn't move. He simply stood there, his face half obscured by shadow, lips curled into a grin that didn't belong on a human face. Her hand trembled violently around the knife. Her breathing was frantic, shallow. She pressed herself against the wall, her eyes never leaving him. The glass between them felt thinner than air, a meaningless barrier that could shatter at any second. The man raised a single finger. Slowly, deliberately, and he traced it across the glass, mimicking the motion of cutting his throat. She dropped to the floor, sobbing, clutching the knife against her chest. With shaking hands, she dialed 911 again, her voice barely coherent as she begged them to hurry. When the officers arrived minutes later, the man was gone. No footprints, no broken glass, no evidence. Just her, hysterical, exhausted, and on the edge of collapse. This time, though, the police took her more seriously. They urged her to pack a bag and leave the apartment for the night. They promised to patrol the building and contact her once they had more information. She left in such a hurry that she forgot half her belongings. She spent the night at a friend's house, curled up on a couch, unable to sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his smile burned into her memory. For a few days, she avoided her apartment. She stayed with friends, moved between couches, always looking over her shoulder. But she couldn't hide forever. Rent was due. Clothes were running out. She had work. So eventually, against every instinct screaming inside her, she returned. The apartment was silent when she stepped inside. The air felt heavier, stale. She checked every room, every closet, every window. Nothing. It looked untouched. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to breathe. Days passed without incident. No texts. No figures at the window. No strange signs. Slowly, the tension in her body began to ease. Maybe he had moved on. Maybe the police scared him off. Maybe she could reclaim her life. But safety was an illusion. One evening, after a long day at work, she sank onto her couch with a glass of wine. The quiet felt comforting for once. She flipped through channels, mindlessly, until her phone buzzed on the coffee table. Her blood ran cold. The message read, "Miss me?" Her hand flew to her mouth. She couldn't breathe. She had changed her number. How had he found it again? Her pulse raced as another message followed. "Don't bother looking outside." Her head snapped toward the curtains, her body shaking. The text was clear. He knew she was already terrified. He was toying with her. Her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a picture. Her living room. Taken from outside the window. She dropped the phone, her hands numb, her body collapsing into the couch. It wasn't just about fear anymore. He was inside her life, inside her every moment. He wanted her to know that she belonged to him, his puppet, his victim, his captive audience. The police, once again, could do little. They advised her to stay with someone permanently, to move, to vanish. But moving takes time, money, stability. And in the meantime, she still had to live. So she did the only thing she could. She installed cameras, locked her windows with new latches, kept her knife closer than ever. But no matter what she did, the text came, always describing what she was doing, always proving he was there. The breaking point came on a cold Friday night. She returned from work, bone-tired, and dropped onto her bed fully clothed. Within minutes, she drifted into a shallow sleep. She woke at 2:47 a.m., not because of a sound, but because of a feeling, that crawling instinct of being watched. Her eyes flicked toward the window. The curtains were open. She hadn't left them that way. Her body froze, her skin crawling. She didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. And then she saw it, a reflection in the glass. Not her own. A man standing inside the room, behind her. She spun around, knife in hand, but the room was empty. Empty, silent, untouched. Her mind screamed, her body shook. She raced to the door, yanked it open, and ran into the hallway barefoot, sobbing uncontrollably. The neighbors heard her and came rushing out. She collapsed at their feet, unable to speak. They called the police. Again, when officers searched her apartment, they found something she had missed in her panic. On her bed, laid neatly across the pillow, was a note. In jagged handwriting, it read, "You finally looked." Her case was finally escalated. She was moved to a secure location while police investigated. But the stalker was never caught. They never found his fingerprints, never traced the messages, never identified the figure in the grainy camera footage. To this day, her apartment remains empty. Neighbors say no one wants to rent it, not after what happened. Some claim they still see a shadow in the window at night, standing perfectly still, waiting. The girl in 3B never returned. And the stalker? He was never seen again. At least, not there. Because if you're listening to this story right now, and if you happen to have a window nearby, maybe you should check. Because some shadows don't stay in the past. Some shadows follow you home.